Today's video, we'll be doing something special as we are celebrating the release of Little Nightmares 3 with a brand new power scaling breakdown of one of my favourite horror franchises of all time. Some of you might remember I did videos on 6 and the Lady in the past going over their power scaling, as well as did a video on Mono, the Thin Man and the Signal Tower for their power scaling. But here's the thing. With Little Nightmares 3 coming out, some major hints from both the game and the official podcast have changed the scaling massively, to the point where I have to completely rescale and rethink how powerful I think some other characters are. In today's video, we'll be exploring the power of the monster baby, which then has the hidden lore behind how powerful 6 must have been at the end of Little Nightmares, as well as some extra lore that could even place 6 stronger than Mono. What this video covers in order. We're going to start off with some basic calculation scaling on the massive monster doll known as Monster Baby. After that, we'll go an analysis in the Monster Baby's known abilities, as well as its stated background. From that, we can then start looking at the lore implications of the Monster Baby to understand its true power beyond just the finite calculations. Then, using that lore, we can discover just how powerful 6 was, being much stronger than I had in the previous video. And then finally, I've come up with a theory that no one else has about just how powerful 6 could be, making her possibly the strongest character in Little Nightmares. Now let's start off with the finite scaling for the Monster Baby, using that of pixel scaling from other Little Nightmares characters. To start off, recall a fact I mentioned in my previous Little Nightmares video, in that the most consistent thing we can use to scale a character's heights are in fact door frames. Doors have a set height in most of pop media and fiction, therefore we can use that because of the fact they're the same height in all the games. And this is even shown in Little Nightmares 3, where we can see that there's a real world and on the other side of the door is about the same size as the doors in the rest of the series. Using that, we, in previous videos, pixel scaled 6 to be about 1 foot 8 inches or 0.56 meters. Small, but not nearly as small as some people might think these characters are. So knowing that alone here, just over 60 pixels is over half a meter in height, we can then use that to scale the size of the Monster Baby's leg, torso and head to get its total height. Surprisingly, when doing these measurements, you'll find that the baby quite literally has a head bigger than its stomach. But when you do all these calculations, you find that the baby's total height is 6.03 meters. However, this is assuming that Alone and the baby are in the same perspective, when clearly the baby's in the background and Lone isn't. To get the difference, we look at the thickness of the baby's finger and find that the scale factor between how far the foreground and the background is about 1.86 times bigger, meaning the true height of the baby is about 11.2 meters, meaning this baby is quite literally a foot taller than Megatron. So the monster dolly is 11.2 meters tall. If we compare that to the average baby at about 47 centimeters tall and also weighing 3.3 kilos, we can do a volumetric scaling increase to say that the monster baby is in fact over 40 tons in weight. However, this assumes that the baby is like a normal human made of things that are flesh and bone and stuff like that, which this baby is not, as it clearly can just walk through things like concrete. Compare the human density of 985 kilograms per cubic meter to that of the average rock density, we can say that the baby's actual weight is more like 124 tons. This means if the baby was to do something simple like get up, just to get up it would be 13.7 million joules, which is in the peak of wall level. We can actually prove this is consistent with some other very passive feats, like when the baby crushes this rock, something you can see in the background. To pixel scale this, I'm using my personal pixel scaling app that I have demonstrated right here. It's useful for finding the areas of awkward shapes. Using that, we can find the rock volume, and using the rock volume and the violent fragmentation of rock needed to completely crush this, we get a total energy of 4.4 million joules, once again in the high wall level just before small building level. Now let's look at the baby's abilities as well as its background. Starting off with the background, if you look at the official Little Nightmares website where it's described as Monster Baby, you'll find its description is an enormous lost dolly endlessly searching another plaything in the ruins of a civilization. And that's all we know about it officially. In terms of abilities, the only unique ability that comes to mind is the fact that the eye of the baby, more particularly its right eye, can gaze and turn what it looks at into stone via petrification. And that's all we really know officially. Now for lore implications of the monster baby to understand its true power. First, understand that when we were looking at the baby's eye and it could do petrification, this is actually something we've seen previously in Little Nightmares. The other time we have seen it is on the moor, where on the moor we had spotlights that if Six walked into, Six would turn to stone. This is the exact same thing as the monster baby's eye. And there are more connections connecting the monster baby to the moor that can be found in this entire video that was over 2 years ago, explaining how monster baby was linked to the moor. Or more recently, on Super Horror Bros channel, you can find quite literally the scene where Lone and Lo exit the moor itself in a desert, and that's where the first setting is, before walking into the city where monster baby is. Quite literally, the monster baby is something that has exited the moor. It is the remnants of the moor, hence the thumbnail. So why does this matter? Why does the fact that the baby is in fact the remnants of the moor, what does this imply? Well, recall that we said the baby has finite energy, which is wall to small building level. Now here's the thing, if the baby has that power for an endless amount of time, whatever gave the baby that power must therefore have an infinite amount of power. And that is because any power, even finite, if lasting for an infinite amount of time, would therefore be infinite power itself. And this sort of endlessly searching that the baby's doing, and it's stated in the official profile, isn't something hyperbolic, it's something quite literal. Another character in Little Nightmares 3, being the supervisor, is stated to have an eternal workforce that she's been working for an endless amount of time, again proving that there's been an infinite amount of time working, consistent with the baby. And this isn't even something unique to Little Nightmares 3, as Little Nightmares 2 had the Thin Man, a character who went on an endless journey in a straight corridor trying to find his way out, proving that that corridor was infinite. And if we take this endless amount of time from how much power the baby had as the remnants of the moor, it means the moor must have provided the character of the giant baby an infinite amount of power to burn through. Now recall, when it comes to how much power the moor has, it's directly powered by the lady from the original Little Nightmares. Meaning if the moor has an infinite amount of power, it means the lady has an infinite amount of power, making her a high universal entity. Now if you will recall, at the secret ending of Little Nightmares 2, we actually see the manifestation of Six's hunger literally brought to life. This is what happens at the end of Little Nightmares 2, when Six leaves Mono and then arrives on the moor. The events of Little Nightmares 1 takes place afterwards, where then we see this hunger slowly grow, or from slowly to exponentially, as Six goes from eating that of a gnome up to eating the lady, quite literally eating a transfigured, weakened child compared to a high universal entity. And Six was able to do this over a few hours. So now let me propose a question for you. How powerful would Six be if you gave Six an endless amount of time? Also think about what could possibly satisfy Six's hunger. Now let's dive into the theory scaling of how Six could be the strongest character in Little Nightmares. First, let's get an understanding of the world and cosmology of Little Nightmares. The world of Little Nightmares is split into two different realms. This is the waking world, or the real world, that is the counties. And then we have the nightmare realm, known as the nowhere. This is where most of the games take place. Now these nightmare realms that contain their own red moon, stars and even constellations can all be accessed by any child going through trauma through their dreams, drifting there through an endless darkness, as happened with Noon in the Little Nightmares podcast. However, to be formally allowed into the nowhere, he must receive passage through that of the ferryman. The ferryman would then take the child across the water to their designated nightmare, the one that they would have manifested from being accepted into the nowhere. Now the fact that these nightmares are separated by an ocean explains why how the moor was considered the safe haven away from the signal tower. Now, if you recall from my previous Little Nightmares video on Mono, we said that the Thin Man has gone through an endless corridor, and that endless corridor was just part of a single transmission of the signal tower. These transmissions go through every TV in the entire world, meaning that it scales to 1.7 billion TVs each that must be giving off an infinite transmission. That is quite literally a multiverse with 1.7 billion universes worth of transmission. And that's not all. See, Mono is able to completely move this signal tower that's connected as a multiverse to everything else, so Mono scales to it. However, there is a time loop in Little Nightmares where Mono turns into the Thin Man after getting stuck in the signal tower, goes back to visit his past self, loses, and the time loop goes over and over. This time loop has been both implied and confirmed by the creators, for anyone wondering. And then, in this loop, the fact that the Thin Man loses would imply the signal power has drained part of Mono's power. And because of such, that means there has been an infinite number of times the signal tower has drained part of Mono's power. And if you recall, any finite power, such as a finite number of universes, repeated over an infinite number of times, would mean the signal tower has an infinite number of universes worth of scaling, which would technically be multiversal plus. So if the signal tower, something that has a multi-plus amount of power, is unable to reach the Maw, the safe haven, because it is a distance across the ocean, the same ocean that is the difference between all nightmares, so it makes sense for it not be able to reach it. That would mean whichever has caused the desert we see in Little Nightmares 3 would have to be something that massively upscales the signal tower. In fact, if we look again to the Little Nightmares podcast, it's implied that if each nightmare is their own island, there are a million island, which is a trillion islands. Meaning that if there's a trillion number of nightmares each that could be as large as the signal tower separated by the ocean, whichever entity has removed the ocean and turned it into a desert could be trillions of times multiversal plus. And this is where 6 comes in. Recall earlier we said that 6 is someone who has exponential hunger, going from a child to that of the lady, an infinite character that we've mentioned before. So that means, could 6 at the ending of Little Nightmares have got rid of the ocean? Did she use the ocean to quench her hunger? This is of course just a theory and nothing that's actually proven in the series, but it should be noted whichever character or entity is responsible for removing the ocean in Little Nightmares, that character is likely the strongest character in all of Little Nightmares, scaling to the entirety of the nowhere. Future Little Nightmare videos. In this video, despite being titled to be about Little Nightmares 3, I have not even talked about the protagonists of Little Nightmares 3 or the massive final boss of that game, all of which have their own unique scaling. If you will give support and like this video, I'm more than happy to do a part 2 scaling Low, Alone, and the Doctor. Also, we have a confirmed second season to the Little Nightmares podcast, as well as a DLC to Little Nightmares 3 expected in the future sometime next year. So expect even more Little Nightmares content when we get even more information of just how much power these characters actually have. And with that, thank you all for watching this video. Check out in the description of this video my Discord server, as well as any other power scaling channels listed there that I think are quite good and worth looking at. Also, you can click on this recommended video or my most recent video. Hope you all have a good day. Thank you all for watching.